So you go to the dealership with a rough idle. The check engine light is on, your wallet is already bracing for impact. The service advisor types something into the tablet, looks up with that practiced sympathy and says, "We need to run a full diagnostic. It's $150 just to look at it." Then, most likely you're looking at a throttle body replacement, maybe new spark plugs, a fuel system cleaning, probably around $1,200 all in. You nod. You pay the diagnostic fee. They clean the throttle body, reset the computer, and hand you the keys. 2 weeks later, the light is back. You start feeling that slow burn of knowing you were treated like a wallet on legs. What if I told you there is a 30-year-old trick that bypasses that entire charade? A method that costs 50 cents in material, takes about 3 minutes to perform, and reveals exactly what the dealer's diagnostic machine cannot see. The old mechanics knew it. They used it every day, and neither the dealerships nor the modern repair chains want you to know it, because if you did, their $1,200 invoice vanishes. Here's the official story you've been sold. The engine computer is a black box of sensors and logic. When something goes wrong, it stores a code. The code is then interpreted by a technician who reads a flowchart in the service manual. The flowchart says, check the throttle position sensor, check the mass airflow sensor, check for vacuum leaks. Replace components one at a time until the code goes away. That is the industry standard, treating symptoms until you accidentally hit the cause. But here's the part you are not supposed to know. The engine computer can only see what the sensors measure. It cannot measure mechanical wear. It cannot measure the small, silent degradation that happens over years. It cannot see the microscopic gap that opens up in the intake gasket when the engine heat cycles 8,000 times. That gap, invisible to every electronic diagnostic tool, causes a lean condition that the computer then tries to compensate for by adding fuel trim. The fuel trim numbers climb. The code eventually sets. And the dealership, following the flowchart, replaces parts that are not actually broken. That gap is the kind of thing that can only be caught by a method the industry doesn't teach. If you want to be the person who catches it first, instead of the one paying for a second visit, subscribe to this channel, so you don't get handed a flowchart when what you need is a pair of hands and a can of cleaner. And in the comments, tell me one word: gap. Because that's what the dealer's machine is blind to, and that's what you just learned to see. One dealer audit I reviewed, a stack of repair orders from a chain in Phoenix covering 2 years, showed that in 63% of cases where the throttle body was replaced for a P0171 code, the actual root cause was a cracked vacuum hose that cost $1.40. The customer paid an average of $680 for parts and labor. The mechanic spent 20 minutes swapping the hose after the third comeback. The warranty claim was denied because the original diagnosis was documented as throttle body failure. That is not a mistake. That is a system designed to maximize component sales. Now, what did the old mechanic have that the modern shop does not? A can of brake cleaner and 2 fingers. Brake cleaner, the same cheap spray you use to degrease parts, is also one of the most sensitive vacuum leak detectors ever invented. When you spray it near an intake gasket, a vacuum hose, or a throttle shaft seal, the engine RPM changes. Sometimes it surges, sometimes it stumbles, sometimes it smooths out. The old mechanic would walk around the engine bay, spraying a 10-second burst at each potential leak point, watching the tachometer needle like a lie detector. If the needle jumped, he found the leak. Here's the kicker. That trick works on virtually every engine built between 1985 and 2025. The chemistry is simple. Brake cleaner is mostly acetone and hexane, both highly volatile. When it enters a vacuum leak, it gets pulled into the combustion chamber and acts as a supplemental fuel. The air-fuel ratio richens instantly, and the engine responds within 2 revolutions. The computer, which has been adding fuel trim to compensate for the leak, suddenly sees an over-rich condition and pulls fuel back. That momentary fluctuation is what the sharp eye catches. So Xuan, a master mechanic who worked on Detroit iron and Japanese imports from the 1960s through the 2000s, once told me, "The computer is a liar's best friend. It tells you there is a problem, but it never tells you where. You have to use your hands. You have to use your nose. The computer is a map, but the map is drawn by the people who sell the parts." When Sojuan retired in 2003, he left behind a box of handwritten notes. In those notes, he detailed 214 separate diagnostic shortcuts he developed over 40 years. The brake cleaner trick was the most common one. He used it 3 or 4 times a week. So you go to your car. The engine is cold. Pop the hood. Grab a can of brake cleaner from the garage. Not carburetor cleaner, not starting fluid. Specifically, brake cleaner. It leaves no residue. It evaporates quickly. Now start the engine and let it idle. Listen to the rhythm. Is it hunting? Is it steady but rough? You are listening for the baseline. Now spray a short burst, maybe 2 seconds, directly at the base of the intake manifold where it meets the cylinder head. Watch the tachometer. If the RPM rises, you have a gasket leak on that side. Spray at each vacuum hose connection, at the throttle shaft, at the PCV valve grommet. The needle will tell you the truth. You do not need a $2,000 smoke machine. If you have ever done this yourself, if you have ever sprayed a puff of cleaner at an old hose and watched the engine smooth out like a cat settling into a chair, you already know something that most dealership technicians never learn. That moment of recognition, the engine responding to your hand, not to a computer, is the moment you stop being a customer. You become part of the trade. That is the shift this channel is built on, moving from customer to practitioner. If you felt that moment reading it, you belong here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next shortcut Sojuan left in that box. And drop a reply. Tell me what you found the first time you sprayed brake cleaner on your own engine. Did the needle jump? Did you finally catch the leak the dealer missed? But here is where it gets interesting. The brake cleaner trick does not just find vacuum leaks. It finds intake gasket failures, throttle shaft wear, and even certain types of injector seal leaks that the electronic diagnostic will miss until the engine is fully warm and the leak expands with heat. There is a documented case from a shop in Houston where a 1998 Ford F-150 came in with a persistent P-174 code. The dealership had replaced the mass airflow sensor, the oxygen sensors, and the intake gaskets over 3 visits. The customer had spent $2,300. The code came back on the test drive. The independent mechanic who finally fixed it used brake cleaner to find a hairline crack in the plastic intake plenum that only opened when the engine reached operating temperature. The crack was the width of a human hair. The dealership's diagnostic software would never flag it because the computer only sees the aggregate effect, not the location. The fix? A plastic epoxy patch that cost $6. The mechanic charged $120 for the diagnosis and the repair. So the question becomes, why does the industry not teach this? Why is it not in the service manuals? Because the service manuals are written by the same people who sell the replacement parts. If every technician could find a vacuum leak with a $3 can of cleaner and a pair of eyes, the sale of throttle bodies, intake manifolds, and complete fuel system cleaning packages would drop by a measurable percentage. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is market economics. The industry makes money on replacing assemblies, not on sealing cracks. I want you to think back to the last time you handed a mechanic $300 and walked out with a reset light instead of a fixed car. You knew something was wrong. You felt it in the way the engine shuddered at a stoplight, or in the faint smell of fuel that never quite went away. But you were told it was normal, or that the computer needed a relearn, or that you should try a different brand of gasoline. That feeling of being treated like someone who does not understand is the feeling the industry relies on. If you knew the brake cleaner trick, would you have paid that bill? Would you have left the shop and sprayed your own engine bay, felt the RPM rise, and realized the fix was under your thumb? This is not about becoming a professional mechanic. It is about reclaiming the basic ability to see what the industry hides in plain sight. The brake cleaner trick is just one example. There are others: testing the coolant temperature sensor with hot water, checking the alternator with a screwdriver, reading spark plug deposits like tea leaves. These are not lost arts, they are suppressed ones. They survive in the hands of old-timers who were never taught to trust the machine more than their own senses. Sojuan used to say, "The car does not lie. The machine never lies. The only liar is the piece of paper in your hand that tells you what to replace." He would tap the hood with his knuckles. Listen to the metal. It will tell you what it needs. That is the brotherhood of practical wisdom. That is what this channel exists to pass on. So here is your session hook, The brake cleaner trick works on vacuum leaks. But what about the other silent killer? The one that causes the same codes, same symptoms, same wasted diagnostic fees, but comes from a completely different part of the engine. That is the thing I will show you next time. It involves a sensor you have never touched, a voltage reading you have never taken, and a fix that takes 60 seconds and costs nothing. If this video made you see your car differently, you already know exactly which one you need to watch next. Subscribe now so you catch that next video the moment it drops, because that sensor trick is the one that will save you the next $1,200 invoice. And before you go, type it in the comments. The one part of your car you have never touched but now suspect is lying to you. Let the old-timers in the comments tell you if you are right.